Run Elite. Hey, it's Andrew Snow here. Now, today we're going to be talking about the research.
Wait, did you say my favorite word?
Yes, Dr. Hill, because he's a doctor, he likes the evidence-based science, and so do I. So today, we're going to be looking at a meta-analysis, which looks not just at a single research paper that tells you how elite distance runners structure their training, but we're going to look at an analysis of hundreds of research papers. And the best part about this is that it's not just done in the lab. A lot of this research is done by looking at the training of what elite distance runners, many of who you know and love, what they actually do. And we're going to be going into where they put their tempo runs, where they put their threshold runs, where they put their easy runs, their long runs, and what the key identifiers are for their success so that you can apply it to yourself too. Does that sound good to you? It sounds good to me. How about you, Dr. Hill?
It sounds great. Let's go.
Let's go. What we're talking about here today is an excerpt of a meta-analysis. So there's lots of research papers. I know you know what a research paper is, but there's a kind of research paper called a meta-analysis where basically the research is on looking at the body of research. So they're not in a lab, they're just analyzing hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of papers that have been done on a topic. And that's a really cool research paper that I found here. It's called The Training Characteristics of World-Class Distance Runners and Integration of Scientific Literature and Results Proven Practice. That's the key word here, is that it's results proven practice. Oftentimes, when we're looking at research papers, it's looking at a metric. We're going to measure lactate threshold or what happens when we intervene with this kind of training or this kind of strength training or this nutrition shift. They look at one thing and they try to isolate that variable and report on it. So it's like a micro window into one specific thing. A meta-analysis takes all of those and can look at a much more global effect of what's going on. So they're very useful if done well. So in this paper, they looked at all sorts of things. That's why it's a behemoth paper. So I'm going to chunk down and look at just one section here. And the section we're looking at is called intensity distribution. Now, intensity distribution is throughout a cycle of training or a year of training or your lifetime of training. Where do you put different intensities of training? Your easy runs, your zone 2 runs, your lactate threshold runs, VO2 max runs, race pace runs. These are all different zones. You've probably heard a lot about zone 2 training. Now there's different models for how you can look at zones. There's a 5 zone model. There's a 6 zone model. There's maybe a 7 zone model, but it's kind of the same thing as the 6 zone model. We're looking at a 6 zone model here. I'm going to clarify for you what these zones are just generally. Now these do go off of percentages of your perceived exertion and your heart rate, but for simplicity, zone 2 is endurance. You can do this all day like a marathon. So that's not all day, but it's endurance. Zone 1 would be even easier. It'd be a truly easy run. Zone 2, endurance, maybe marathon. Zone 3 is your tempo runs. Zone 4 is getting up to lactate threshold, turn points 1 and 2. Zone 5 is VO2 max, even faster. Zone 6 is anaerobic training, truly anaerobic, 1 mile, 800 meter. And then zone 7 is power. That's going to be sprint training. So you don't need to remember those. We're going to go through them as I talk about this paper here. So as I was reading this, I made a giant cheat sheet for myself to be able to walk you through the findings of this. When we look at the history of research that's been done, and they're looking at over 200 papers that have been written on this here, they're looking at basically 3 models that kind of emerge from what people tend to look at. The 3 models are a pyramid model. Now, pyramid model is where you do a lot of easy running, and then you do some less medium pace running, and then you do even less high intensity. So it's a pyramid. Easy, faster, less mileage, even faster, less mileage. A pyramid. You get that. That's one of the general ways that runners train, at least when researchers look at them, what they assume they train. The second way is a polarized training method. A polarized training method is the same, but it's heavily weighted on the 2 ends. So it's a lot of easy running. It's a little bit of in between moderate running, and then it's a lot of fast paced running. That's a polarized model. And model number 3 is a threshold model, where it's heavily favored in the middle. There's a lot of work, and you've heard of this Norwegian method, double threshold running. You've probably heard of this, and there's some easy running, of course, and there's some fast running, but it's heavily weighted towards the middle. With all this talk of science and training and all that stuff, there's a lot of work that I put into this, so I'm not asking much for you, but if you're liking this video, do us a favor, do me a favor, do Dr. Hill a favor. What do you want him to do?
I want you to hit the like button and the subscribe button, please. Oh, please.
Yeah, Dr. Hill, I'd love for them to do that too. It's a free way you can support the channel. Back to the video.
Yeah!
These are the 3 most general ways. There's lots of specificity to these, but just globally, You could probably put most training plans into these categories here. Now, this meta-analysis showed that these methods are inadequate for predicting your performance. They're not good enough, and the reasons are twofold. Number one is because models like this, and a lot of runners use this, don't they? They think that they should run 80% easy and then do their weekly interval and their weekly tempo run with a long run and just rinse and repeat for a year. That's not how elite runners train. And this meta-analysis showed that this is an inadequate way to approach your training because two reasons. Number one, elite athletes don't train the same throughout a long period of time. They shift where their distribution of training goes as they approach their race. This sounds a lot like the triphasic model that I teach you guys. I didn't make up the triphasic model. I got it from looking at this research. So elite runners, they train differently early in the season, mid-season, and right before competition. It doesn't fit any of these models. We have to change our intensity distribution as we go through. Number two is that as you get more fit, these models break down even more because as you become more and more elite, then when you do a zone 2 or zone 3 kind of training, so we'll call this perhaps marathon pace. When you're training in these intensity zones, the more elite you get, you're at a higher percentage of your VO2 max at those paces. So an elite marathoner, their marathon pace is a much higher percentage of VO2 max than a beginning marathoner, and their marathon pace is a much lower percentage. Elite runner, it's going to be harder metabolically to do these tempo runs. A tempo run, we can vary the pace, we can vary the distance, of course, but you have an idea for what a tempo run might feel like. Of course, it can vary. But for an elite runner, tempo runs are more taxing because they're more metabolically taxing because they're running at a higher percentage of their VO2 max. So as you get more fit, we need to change the model for you. Therefore, a training model that works for a beginning runner is not a good training model for an elite runner. Even if we follow certain principles, it's going to change over time. Let's dive deeper. Now, a rule of thumb, which is just no more than that, it's a rule of thumb, it doesn't really mean much, it's just an idea, is that we should do 80% of our running easy. 80% of it in zone 2? I wonder. We hear a lot about this. There's a lot of videos, there's a lot of content. It just got really popular to talk about training in zone 2. I think when Phil Maffetone was getting popular, everybody's talking about zone 2. But there's a problem. Okay, it is true that 80% of elite runners' volume is easy, but it's not zone 2. It's 80% in zone 1 and zone 2. 80% there. So there's some zone 2, a lot of it. There's a lot of zone 1. And guess what? Most of that 80% exists in zone 1. That's a little bit of a head scratcher. So what that implies to us is that we want to be training most of our volume very easy. Not even zone 2. Zone 2 might be, for many runners, approximately marathon pace, which is kind of easy if you're going out for 4, 5, 6, 7 miles, but it's still pretty fast. When I think about marathon pace, I'm like, oh boy, that's kind of intimidating. I'm going to run slower today. I do almost all of my running significantly slower than zone 2. And I suggest for you that if you want to model what the elites do, most of your running is actually in zone 1, not zone 2. Okay, moving on here. Now, there's differences between marathon runners and track runners, and we have both in this group here. Some of you are running 5Ks and 10Ks. A lot of you are doing half marathon and above. So let's look at the differences throughout these 200-ish studies that they looked at. And by the way, I want to make a point to you here. The title of this paper, let's recap it. It's The Training Characteristics of World-Class Distance Runners, an Integration of Scientific Literature and Results Proven Practice. So many of the sources that they're citing here are actual training systems from world-class coaches and world-class runners. Hundreds of them. Joshua Cheptegei, Haile Gebrselassie, Bob Kennedy, Florence Kiplagat. Those are just the ones I have on my screen right here. And there's 200 of these. So it's actually observing what they're doing. Now, here's the difference between marathoners and track runners. With the marathon, one of the best predicting things that you can do is your weekly long run. Not the end all be all, but it's very important. Weekly long runs done between 30 and 40 kilometers, which is about 18 to 24 miles. That's a pretty long run. We can just call it a nice even 20 miles, a little more, a little less. And they do them slower than marathon pace, just a little bit slower. So let's look at what that means for you. If you're a marathoner, one of the best things that you can do is unlock your ability to do regular long runs, perhaps every week or 3 out of 4 weeks. And you want them to be close to marathon distance, not quite, maybe 18 to 24 miles. And you want to do them not just regularly, but you want to get to a point to where you can do them just a bit slower than race pace. Not a lot slower and not necessarily faster. So how do we get there? How do we bridge that gap? This is an elite concept because an elite runner, probably an elite marathoner, they probably have decades, at least many years, probably decades of running experience, running at high volume. So they're no stranger to running a 20-mile run. Frank Shorter ran a 20-mile run every week, year round. Christmas, Olympic year, peaking for a race, base training, doesn't matter. 20 miles every week. But he didn't run them at the same intensity. But I want you to start to think about this. If we're gonna run a 20 miler at close to marathon pace, you have to be pretty dang fit. We do not wanna start our training by doing that. It's way too hard. You're gonna burn out, you're gonna need too much recovery after, and it's gonna cost you. So how do we get there? We wanna get there ideally at the beginning of support training. So we have base, support, specific. Support and specific training are gonna be about 6 weeks each. So this gives you about 3 months. And then you have base training before that. Now in your base training, I want you to get to a place where you can run 18 to 24 miles just easy. Zone 1, maybe we put some strides. Maybe there's a little bit of zone 2 in there. Maybe a little bit. But I want you to just regularly be able to move your feet 20 miles, and it's no big deal. You can recover from it. It's a relatively low percentage of your weekly volume, so you've built up your volume, etc. That's why it's called base training. You're not really training for your marathon. You're getting ready to have the fitness to be able to train. Then when you get to support training, you want to do a regular long run that approaches those distances, getting close to your actual marathon distance at close to marathon pace. This is what I call endurance quality training. So if you've read my book, I think everybody here probably has. Once we get into support training, we do endurance quality and speed quality. And we might do one of each per week. It depends. Your endurance quality is going to be even slower, but longer. And then as you get closer to your race, it's going to speed up until it's almost marathon pace, but maybe a little shorter. And I'm not going to talk about fast quality just for the sake of time here, but it's the opposite. It's running really fast for really short and then slowing it down, but doing it longer. But let's just look at the endurance quality aspect of this. If you're going to get to a point to where you're running longer and longer distances, let's call it 20 miles, and you want to get closer and closer to marathon pace, isn't it a good idea to run even longer, but just very easy before that? So this is where things like 24 miles or even 26 miles, or for those who have a higher mileage, maybe even 30-mile long runs. Maybe that's not for everybody, but it might be for you if you're a high volume runner. You want to run very long, but just so dang easy that you're not fatigued, not overly fatigued from it. That is one of the goals of base training. Get those long runs up, get your mileage up. Super easy. Zone 1, zone 1, zone 1, zone 1, baby. If you push it even into zone 2, your volume is going to suffer. So don't do it. Zone 1, that's what elites are doing. Most of their time is in zone 1, especially in that foundational phase. Now, once you're done with that and you go into support training, guess what? You can knock it down. If you're used to a 24 or 26 mile run, which sounds quite long, but I'm telling you, you can do it very slow, very easy. Take a walking break even. If you're able to do that, you can chop it down to just 18 miles, and now you increase the pace closer to marathon pace. And that is one of the biggest predictors of your success in your marathon. Can you regularly do these runs? Both marathoners and track runners, they spend about 5 to 15% in zone 3 and about 5 to 15% combined in zone 4 and 5. Let's review what those zones are. And this is over the course of their whole season. Remember that it's going to change throughout the season. And that's where marathoners and track runners differ, is where it changes. But the percentages are the same. So both elite marathoners and elite track runners run about 5 to 15% in zone 3 and 5 to 15% in zone 4 and 5. Most everything else is going to be zone 1, some zone 2, and a little bit of zone 6. And that's like our sprint training, our hill sprints, our strides, things like that. I've used a lot of massage guns in my life, and this one is by far the best. It's by Bob and Brad. Now, it comes with attachments that you can use that either will make it hot or cold, or you can do it as I use it with just the standard tip on this, but it's like a nice pointed tip that gets right deep into your muscles. It comes in a box that looks like this. It's pretty awesome, and I've got a coupon code for you in the description below. Let's recap. Zone 3 is more of your tempo pace. This is going to be just shy of lactate threshold. It's going to be maybe half marathon pace, 10K to half marathon pace, somewhere in there, just shy of your lactate threshold. 5 to 15% of all your volume there. And then 5 to 15% combined of zone 4 and 5. Zone 4 is lactate threshold. Zone 5 is VO2 max. So those workouts that runners really like to do, double threshold runs and the VO2 max power track intervals, those are good, but we don't want to exceed 5 to 15%. That's quite a range, but we'll call it 10% or so of your volume in a week. It's not that much. If you're running 60 miles, you might get 10K worth of this kind of quality, average throughout a season. That is the same for a marathoner and a track runner, but now let's look at the difference. With marathoners, they go from slower to faster, essentially. So as they get closer to their competition, that 5 to 15%, it might be more heavily weighted. So if you're a marathoner, that long tempo kind of effort, which is somewhat similar to what we were just talking about, those long runs, right? It's not so fast, but it's not slow enough to be easy. It's harder than an easy run. It's harder than a zone 2 run. but it's easier than a threshold run, okay? That's this endurance tempo. Those runs get more and more and more and more and more heavily weighted as they approach their competition. What that means if you're a marathoner is that lots of zone 1, some zone 2, and some sprint and hill training. In base training, get that long run to where we just talked about here regularly. And then as you get closer to your race, so we're talking 10 to 12 weeks out, you're gonna increase those paces. You're going to increase that zone 2 and you're going to go into a zone 3 and you're going to do these longer runs. This is endurance quality training, but you might do something like 3x5K, 4x2 mile, a half marathon race, which would be a little bit more intense, but it's okay. You're going to do those as you get closer and closer and closer. A track runner is going to do the opposite. Track runners, they should be starting with more speed development early on. We want to really unlock 2-to-1 ratio, 2 strides per mile run per week, and 3 days of 8x8 hill sprints. That's a lot of speed. And we want to unlock that very early in your training. And as you get closer to your peak race, what elite middle distance runners do is they run a higher percentage of their volume in zone 1. That sounds crazy. They're getting ready for the Olympics, so they're running easier. Yep. They're going to do workouts, of course, that are very demanding at lactate threshold, at zone 4, zone 5, even zone 6. They're going to do these workouts that really punch them in the face. And then they're going to run so stinking easy on their other days. It's really modulated. For a middle distance runner, they're going to build up a lot of this speed, lots of strides, lots of hill sprints. And as you get closer and closer and closer to your race, you're going to do less volume. I'm not saying less hard workouts, because you can do a very hard workout that isn't that much volume, but your volume is going to go down, 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 and your very easy running is going to go up, up, up. Imagine a power lifter who's lifting super heavy on one day, and then the other days, they're just kind of like massaging their muscles, doing lighter weights, doing some reps, but not going to the max for maybe multiple days to recover before they go again to super power, right? That's analogous to what a track runner should do. I'm so inspired by this research that I'm going to make some more content for you. I think in future Q&As, I'm going to break down other sections of this research. We can look at training volume, training methods, tapering, altitude training, etc. Now, if you liked that video, then I know that you're going to love videos that we have coming up in the near future for you. So, Dr. Hill, just get up here. He likes to take it nice and slow.
I don't know why. It's more fun that way.
So if you can go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel, that would help us out a lot. But if you haven't picked up a copy of Run Elite, Train and Think Like the Greatest Runners of All Time,
it's really an awesome book. I mean, just read the reviews on Amazon. If that's not science, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, go ahead and pick up a copy of the book. It's on Amazon. I recorded the audiobook myself. I know you're gonna love it. More science-based evidence coming at you in our next video. This has been Andrew Snow and
Dr. Hill.
See you next time.